Welcome back to the Future of the Fork. I'm your host, Guillaume Bouchard. My guest today is Ken Cruz, co-founder and CEO of Soul Community Planet, a hospitality company built around wellness, community, and sustainability. Before launching SCP, Ken spent decades in hospitality, including leadership roles in major organizations such as Marriott and Sunstone Hotel Investors. What caught my attention wasn't just his resume. It was something Ken said during our first conversation, that most people already have the idea they're looking for. The real challenge is finding the courage to act before they have certainty. So today we're talking about hospitality, entrepreneurship, risk, human connection, and why the future may belong to people willing to take the first step before the roadmap reveals itself. Ken, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Guillaume. It's such a pleasure to be here. Appreciate that introduction.
Ken, for people meeting you for the first time, walk us through your journey in hospitality and how you ended up leading some of the industry's major organizations.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So, as is the case with most youth, I would say, or a strong percentage of youth, got through high school to college, followed that track that was very prescribed, if you will, without really having a great vision for what I wanted to be when I grew up. And kind of gravitated toward this idea of hospitality while I was in college. And my first job out of school was to work at a hotel in Marco Island, Florida. It was an incredible experience, understanding all the aspects of how hospitality is served up and the hard work that those folks that are on the front line engage in and day out. Learned a lot about the business from that role. From there, I went into grad school, met my wife there, where we were both studying business, and we both ended up at Marriott International in different disciplines within the organization. She's more on the marketing side and the revenue generation side. I was more on the investing side and the real estate front, and did that for quite some time. Moved on to Host Hotels, which is the real estate entity, and stuck with the real estate side throughout my career. During that incredible journey, I had the great fortune of being part of a team at Host Hotels that transformed the company from what was a sort of a haphazard grouping of legacy assets and entities from the original Marriott International Corporation. It was spun off back in the 90s, and our job was to reconstitute that company into a viable business that stood on its own right. And through great leadership, with Chris Nassetta was one of our senior guys, and he's now CEO of Hilton globally. A bunch of the other players who have moved on to interesting roles within our industry. We were all together and hatched this strategy and executed on it through very small increments over the course of multiple years. And the end result is Host Hotels now is one of the leading blue chip lodging real estate investment trusts in the industry. From Host, I moved on to a company called Sunstone Hotel Investors and was able to take that playbook and reenact that in many ways in the leadership of Sunstone. And just to hear again, happen to be at a great place at the right time, right point in the cycle with a terrific team. And we were able to execute quite well and generated meaningfully superior returns for our investors. And again, part of it was just timing is very important in our industry. And so part of it was that I stepped into the CEO role right at the bottom of what was called the Great Financial Crisis. We refer to it as the GFC, as it was that impactful to our world. And that resulted in some great opportunities for acquisitions, some great relationships that we were able to build through folks who we could step in and provide capital and provide solutions to challenges that they were facing during the GFC. And the end result was some of the best transactions that I've been involved in throughout my career. And the investors benefited as a result. We took our equity market cap from a low of about $90 million, and this is a New York Stock Exchange traded public company, to about 3.6 billion or so when I left the company back in 2015. And at that time, then we started to form our own independent businesses. And soon I tricked my wife into starting up this company that we have today, which is in retrospect, a product of a concept that in Japan is known as ikigai. Ikigai is, I'm going to kind of mess it up a little bit for Western consumption, but the general idea is if you take what you're passionate about and what you're good at, what the world needs, and what a business can actually be successful at, combine those three circles into a Venn diagram. The center of that Venn diagram is essentially ikigai. That's not exactly the way it's defined, but that's a good way to think about it. And we took our ikigai and created Soul Community Planet, which is founded on the values that we stand for: healthy, kind, and green. It's based on a lot of the things that we've learned throughout a very fortunate career working with some of the best and brightest in our industry. But it's also oriented around some needs that had emerged over the last few decades, really, in terms of modern consumers, mindful travelers, conscious consumers who are all looking for travel experiences that also comport with their value systems. And that's not being very well provided for with some of the legacy brands that are currently existing in our industry. So we formed Soul Community Planet to fill that niche, to fulfill that need. And now we've been growing it over the last, 7 or 8 years now into a portfolio of 10 hotels with different brand expressions, and seems to be working pretty well. The guests like it, and we've learned a lot on the way.
I mean, the journey is really interesting. That the first part there caught my attention, that you didn't know what you wanted to do and you just went for something, and you went in hospitality, and there was a lot of learning along the way. You ended up getting success that many people dream of. Did success feel the way you expected it to feel, or did you notice that you were in that seat?
Oh, yeah. A great question. I don't think that anybody fully envisions what success is going to be, or what we perceive to be success is often very different when it ultimately manifests. And so certainly my journey, I don't think of any instance in my personal journey as being, ta-da, I've achieved this mythical success that we were all envisioning. I look at it as just a step-by-step journey, and it's just continuing, and we're growing and we're learning more. And as an entrepreneur, I can tell you there's no day that you wake up and feel successful. Every day we wake up and say, okay, there's 100 different fires burning today. Which ones am I going to, address first? And we'll work on the next ones and the next ones after that. I find that to be incredibly energizing and fulfilling, and just it's one of it's I love this kind of an existence, but I certainly don't think of success as the way I would describe what we're doing. It's figuring out how to do things a little bit better each day. But I think that the more direct response to your question is that it just seems like we're supposed to have this vision and this roadmap in front of us when we start off in the world. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got 4 daughters, and each one of them are very early on in their own personal journeys. And so I try to spend a fair amount of time with them saying, guys, you're not going to know what you're going to be doing in a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years. What you do have control of is what that next step that you take. And then that's going to build your track record. That's going to build your legacy. That's ultimately going to lead to doors that you didn't know existed that are going to open up for you. So I think of success as a very fluid, very dynamic, and ill-defined concept that, to be honest, hopefully none of us ever fully feel like we've achieved. Because then what do you do? I've achieved this great success, and I'm not sure what I would do. I'm not the kind that would ring the bell and say, okay, I'm all done with this professional journey.
Yeah, it's interesting. We seem to look at others and say, "Oh, they're successful," and we make it seem like it's a destination. You've led several organizations. How would was there a point where you started asking what comes next? To make that next leap. You started SCP, but before that, you were at different organizations.
Well, always. And I would tell you, I think early on in my career in particular, I probably was thinking a lot more and too much about what's next. I think often we think about, and this is I think a good example that we engage in our daily lives is, what's that next thing? You're on a vacation and you're thinking about your next vacation. You're at a great restaurant. You're thinking about the next great restaurant. And so being present and just experiencing whatever stage in your journey you're on is a really important thing. But you do have to balance that with aspiration if you seek to achieve more in your career. I know that there are a lot of people who are very happy with sort of a baseline and doing something for work that enables a lifestyle that's outside of their profession. The way I tend to think of things is the whole life experience is melded together so that work supports life, but you don't check out of your life when you're at work. And that's another good way to describe what we've tried to create here with Soul Community Planet is It's a company that's for like-minded individuals who seek to live a mindful existence, who value being, trying to elevate their wellness, trying to do more with respect to social good and kindness and connectivity. And of course, seek to live a life that is in some ways respectful of and supportive of the natural environment. And so, if you feel like your work is advancing those same values, my view is that you can be more engaged, more inspired, and actually more productive because you're doing something that is consistent with the life that you live outside of work. So we talk about balance and having separation of work and life and so on. I think of it as one big happy mishmash that your life is. I mean, think about it. How much of our lives are do we spend at work? I mean, it's a significant amount, certainly at this stage in our lives, of our time that we're engaged in work. I think it would be a tragedy if that work was considered to be distinct from the actual life that you're aspiring to live. So we try to mix all those things together. With that in mind, back to your question about the next step and how do you position yourself for moving forward in a professional sense. And I think the best way to move forward in a professional sense is to think about, how do I do the best I can possibly do in the task that's in front of me? And how do I execute extremely well? How do I make myself as valuable as possible to the organization that I'm working with? And as a result, again, it's somewhat unpredictable, but in my experience, at least, those interesting opportunities have arisen largely as a product of the contributions that I've been focused on making in my current role.
I like the way you frame, the everything kind of melds together. I think it's really hard to disconnect from the work. We all know the environment that you're in helps shape you, whether it's work, the activities, the people that are around you. Moving towards SCP, but also your journey, because everything I've heard is it's been pretty linear success wise. Share with us, maybe an assumption that you had early on that turned out to be wrong and you had to pivot. Where are the challenges?
Yeah, thank you for that question because I mentioned I have four daughters. When they were younger, I'd always say, "Hey, let's when you're giving a life lesson of some sort, I always refer back to that Disney fairy tale where the princess is born to this beautiful kingdom in this beautiful kingdom with the birds chirping and the flowers blooming and the benevolent parents, and she marries Prince Charming and grows old and has a wonderful life, and everything is peaceful and joyful, and nothing ever goes wrong. And I say, girls, do you remember that fairy tale? Of course they don't, because that fairy tale doesn't exist. That would be one of the most boring fairy tales ever. And that's because that's not how life is supposed to work. Life is supposed to be as much about the downs as it is about the ups. In fact, the ups have very little significance in your life if you don't have challenge and you don't have unforeseen bumps in the road and stumbles and lessons learned. We refer to that sometimes as the blessing of a skinned knee. And so we could, if we have a few hours, I can spend a lot of time talking about all the mess ups I've had and all the twists and turns I've experienced in my career. And there have been plenty of them, ranging from electing to leave host hotels when we were, in a really great ramp up phase with that business after we, as I mentioned, sort of redefined and reestablished a strategy for that company and joined a much earlier phase company in Sunstone Hotel Investors, moved the family across the country and found myself about a week into that role saying, what have I done? This is a totally different enterprise, much more cavalier and cowboyish in terms of how they're doing things. And I was just in an environment that I wasn't used to. I was used to being in a very corporate world. And in retrospect, that was a wonderful thing for me, even though I felt like I'd made a bad mistake, again, a couple weeks into it over the course of time, that leaving my comfort zone and finding myself in an environment that was very different from what I was used to enabled me to grow, enabled me to push myself into new challenges. And one of the neat things about Sunstone, as compared to the larger enterprises I was involved in, is that we all wore a variety of different hats. We had to. We just didn't have that big of a team. Versus at Marriott, for example, you have thousands of people at corporate headquarters. Everybody has a very defined box that they're in. And that's not a bad thing. That's how big corporations work. But I loved the fact that at Sunstone, man, there was a point where I was general counsel and CFO and any number of roles that I, to be honest, I had no training in and no business being in those roles, but that was a role that needed to be fulfilled. And the chairman at the time decided that that was something that I could do. I would have been the first one to say, no way can I do this. But of course, I was, okay, fine, I'll figure it out. And that has served me so well throughout my career, just being pushed into roles that I didn't think I was ready for, but somebody else had belief in me. And somebody else said, yeah, you can do this. Figure it out. And I kind of live by those words. And in fact, a lot of people get frustrated with me these days is when we're moving forward into uncharted terrain, my my common phrase is, we'll figure it out. And we always do. And we typically figure it out in a way that is not following the course that we thought we were going to. So a bunch of those, I think that the punchline from all that is for anybody who's, again, starting out on a career, who's maybe not as confident in their own skill set as they might be. I think it's important to know that nobody feels like they are the perfect candidate to perform whatever task is at hand. Most people feel like, no, this is something that I'm made for. Maybe I'm confident that I can figure this out. But most people don't feel like they have all the answers when they start on a new job or a new task or a new project, and that's an okay thing. In fact, if you feel like you have all the answers, usually you're going to be the one who messes it up because you're overconfident in in the decision making process.
What you're saying is whether you know everything or you don't know anything, when you move forward, you're going to find things that you didn't know. So if you know everything, you're going to hit things where, oh, I didn't calculate this. And maybe if you don't know anything or feel like you don't know anything, you move forward and you're like, I know these few things. Oh, and I think I know somebody that can help me with, this gap. That kind of brings me to the portion where, the myth of certainty. One of the things that struck me with our first conversation, you were mentioning, there's no shortage of good ideas. Why do you think so many people never act on theirs?
Well, I think here again, it comes down to people think, well, first of all, I don't have that big idea. Everybody talks about, if I were to branch off on being an entrepreneur, I need that big idea to anchor my path on. First of all, I don't mean to imply that everybody should be or wants to be an entrepreneur. It's a very very challenging existence. And I use that term pretty broadly for what we're doing. We're building a new business. We're vertically integrated with the brands and the management company and the real estate. I like to call it a three-ring circus of things. So we've compounded the complexity, the uncertainty, the task at hand, if you will, through this vertically integrated structure. That's certainly not for the faint of heart. And so a lot of people are much more comfortable being in a much more well-defined space. But for those who are inclined to explore this idea of starting off a new business and doing something on their own, and let's face it, we've never been in an environment that's more conducive to starting off on your own with the technological tools that are available to us today. It's just amazing how easy it is to start a business. And talking to one of my daughters about this the other day, that they said, well, how do you start a, my youngest daughter was, how do you even start a business? And I said, well, today you can go to AI and say, I want to start a business around this and give me a full roadmap. And you'll end up with a 50 page, 500 step document on everything that you need to do. And it'll do a lot of it for you, whether it's the permitting or the approvals or the business planning and et cetera, et cetera. So the tools are available to people now. And I think that's a distinct advantage that individuals have today that we didn't have, that I didn't have when I was younger. It was much more difficult to figure out all the pieces of the puzzle. So now it comes down to just having this confidence that you need to take the first step. You don't need to have all 500 steps, as I just described, figured out day one. You just need to know, here's what I want to try to do, and take that first step, and then take the second step, and take the third, and recognize that there will be incredible challenges. There will be so many different things that don't work the way that you wanted them to, and have a willingness to roll with that, learn from that, fall forward or fail forward, and whatever term you want to use with that. But failure and mess ups and tasks and initiatives that don't perform the way that you anticipated they would, that's all part of the that's all part of the process. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons why individuals don't, or businesses, I should say, don't succeed. You hear the statistics, such a huge percentage of startup businesses don't exist past year 5. Much of that isn't because it wasn't a good idea, but rather because the founder lacked, financial resources or grit or perseverance, or just didn't appreciate the magnitude of effort that is required to achieve success in anything we do. I always come back to the fact that the value of an undertaking is directly correlated to the effort that that undertaking requires. So, if we're just the world's greatest checkers player and we're the champion at checkers, well, it's probably less fulfilling to be a champion checkers player when you have a talent that exceeds everyone else's, versus to win in the checkers game because you somehow pulled yourself up and figured out the right strategy and beat somebody who is perceived to be superior. That is so much more valuable than than sort of coming with all the answers and having all the advantages day one. So that's a big part of starting up a business. Just expect that you're going to be coming from behind all the time. And you're going to be, rolling through all sorts of frustrating, embarrassing, demoralizing experiences all the time. And that's a good thing. I'm smiling when I say that because that is part of the journey, as we said a moment ago.
I think what you're also saying is being outside of your comfort zone is where you're going to be building towards success. You're learning a lot when you get out of that comfort zone. You're doing new things. You're moving forward. I feel like I've followed a few athletes where I felt they had all the talent in the world, but they didn't put the time in. And that created a gap between who won and who didn't. I kind of want to bring it back to SCP and you, Ken. When people look back at the work you're doing with the company, what do you hope they say you helped change?
Thank you for that question as well. You've got a lot of good ones. So, Soul Community Planet, as I mentioned, was founded by my wife and myself around the core values of healthy, kind, and green, or wellness, connectivity, and social good, and regenerative travel or stewardship of our planet. If you look at our vision is quite simple. We exist to make the world around us a better place by serving those who value those 3 core values: wellness, kindness, and sustainability. That's a really simple concept. And it sounds on its surface to be so lofty and so impactful. Oh, you're going to change the world. Good. That's just a hyperbolistic statement that has very little meaning. I disagree. I disagree completely. Everything that we do, every decision that we make impacts the world around us in some way. The salad you had for dinner last night impacted the world in some way. Anything that we do. So we get to choose. Are we going to try to put a good into the world, or are we going to go about it, in a self-serving way that doesn't consider the concentric impacts that we have on the world around us, the ripple effect, we like to talk about it. And so for us, we're not super focused on this idea of legacy or, what are we going to leave behind or anything. We're more focused about the present, the here, the now. How do we take steps in the right direction that maybe put a little brightness in the world that didn't exist before? How do we figure out a way to help our team to achieve their own personal goals and do a little bit better in their own lives? Recognizing that every single person that we interact with, the person across the desk, the person that we're working with, the individual who may choose to come and dine in our restaurants, each one of those individuals is the hero of his or her own epic journey. And in many ways, they're the author of that journey as well. And so for us to say, man, I can help to write one little sentence in that person's epic novel of life, or provide one little element of punctuation that's positive in that journey is such an amazing and humbling role to be in. And so we think of SCP is enabling humankind to be humankind, and for us to kind of live the lives that we're supposed to. You and I were talking earlier about how the World Cup is reminding us how, instead of how different we are and how bad they are and how good we are, which we unfortunately see in the news and in politics, rather than that, we're seeing how everybody's got just incredible stories and cultures, and humans are much more similar than they are dissimilar. So I don't know. I find Soul Community Planet the main. I think if I look at the main value that we create is this positive ripple effect that has the potential to create a lot of incredible good around the world. And we do measure that through our Every State is Good program. That's one of these innovations that we're very proud of, where when guests choose to stay with the Soul Community Planet, they're enabling incredible, measurable impacts on the world around us. We've planted over 300,000 trees thanks to our guests in unnaturally deforested areas that need reforestation. We've recovered an incredible tons and tons and tons of human generated waste on ecologically sensitive beaches and in some of the most pristine areas in the world. We've got programs for at risk youth. We plant seed trees, which is kelp, which does a huge positive for the ecosystems and the environment when that's done in the correct way. So the fact that we talk about putting good out in the world through our organization. Well, we bring that home in a real measurable way on behalf of our guests through the Every State is Good program.
Oh, Ken, time flies. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'd love to give the floor to you to help our listeners who are entrepreneurs, people looking to maybe build a business and get inspired by leadership, but also I think for those who want to experience SCP, what's the best way to connect with you or with your brand?
Sure. Thank you for that. And I apologize. We've got the guys with the blower right outside of my window, so hopefully that doesn't impact things too much. But so you can find us on LinkedIn. Ken Cruz on LinkedIn is a good way to track down. I try to be relatively active there with posts about the new and exciting things that we're working on, and I'm reachable there. Soul Community Planet SCP Hotels is the website, so feel free to check us out. This may not be specifically what you were asking, but I would like to leave the audience with some encouragement about if you are at all inclined to get out there and start a business, do something on your own, whether it's a sole proprietorship or something that's going to be the next Marriott International. There's never been a better time to do that. And I just encourage people to have confidence in their own abilities, the fact that it will take a great deal of grit, and that in and of itself will help to build your character, your strength, your your wherewithal for taking on future and greater challenges. So expect it's going to be difficult, but expect the reward is 100% correlated with the amount of effort that you're going to put into it. So, and if you have questions and want to learn more about all the stumbles and skinned knees that I've experienced, please hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'd love to continue the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ken, for the wisdom and the hand sitting here speaking with us.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you, Guillaume, for your time today.
To our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, share it with a friend. We love the hospitality and food and beverage, and we'll bring you more stories. Until next time, I'm Guillaume Bouchard, and you've been listening to The Future of the Fork.